Great games at your table. I'm Jonathan Albin, and this is Nikos RPG. And today we are going to be talking about role-play in a way that you may not have considered before. Here on Game Master's Guide, we try to support every style of role-playing available, imaginable, and such. And the Nikos mechanism, Nikos RPG, is the easiest to learn. For more information about that, go to nikosrpg.com. Download the easy to play, the fast play version, and get access to your own persona packets for the characters that you play, and I think you'll find there's a lot of really cool dynamics in that. Anyway, before we get started today, so as we go into these different styles of play, what is it you expect from your role-play game session? The classic role-play games like Dungeons & Dragons generally try to capture the ambiance of a very deep, very intertwined and very interconnected story in a fantasy genre, and generally it follows the hero's journey, starting out with the persona being less talented and less aware of the world that they're in, and discovering what that really means over sessions. And therefore, if you play week over week or month after month, year after year, and you're playing only within one of the mechanisms, you're really depriving yourself of the opportunity of playing in a bunch of different story types, because fundamentally, in all of those, you're doing the same things, which is you're advancing your skill over time, moving from one type of encounter to another, but generally working your way from low sophistication, low skill, to higher sophistication, higher skill, to the point where you become a master of all of the potential skills you could learn, and you level out or complete the arc of the character at about 16th to 20th level. This advancement process does give itself to that kind of storytelling, but it does restrict other stories that might perhaps be enjoyable, and that's why many times a game master will afford you the opportunity in a one-shot environment to bring a character that's already been advanced a certain amount, so that they don't have to actually work on that portion of the story. The problem with it is that the mechanics of a game such as those, because they're built upon advancement, and advancement is the only drive really built into the system, it's difficult to capture other nuances of social interaction, creature tenacity, player purposes, and the like. And generally, they are a points-based system where the elimination of your enemy is the solution most often reached for. And granted, there are ways to gain advanced experience points or whatever in the games without that. Once your game master is up to speed, still mechanically the game is clunky for anything other than that type of a story. But just realizing that what you want from your game is going to determine what you're going to look for. As we look at these different categories, I think you'll see why there are differences in game design and play mechanics. So, right off its face, the first one that really doesn't fit in classic Dungeons & Dragons mechanism is the very idea of escapism and irreverent humor. If you are just there to pull shenanigans and jump off of cliffs and see what the outcome is, there are much more festive versions of roleplay than the simple Dungeons & Dragons mechanism, because this level of wackiness, so to speak, can be fundamentally lethal in a game where if you run out of hit points, you run out of life, and that character dies, start over. And when you are looking at a game that has this level of escapism, perhaps the world isn't wild enough. Generally speaking, role-play games are set in worlds that are associated with our world in terms of how gravity works, how mechanics work, how lighting works, how the game generally is focused on a Terra type world. And so if you're looking for true escapism and looking for what could be, much broader boundaries, you might be recommended to try games like Paranoia or Toon. Toon is a great one, although it's currently out of print. There are plenty of game masters that will run a Toon type adventure. And Nikos RPG indeed has mechanisms for ignoring the current rules of physics and making up your own silly as you go. So the idea is that if every person at the table is playing with this in mind, you can have a great time. But the problem with the escapism and irreverent humor, if that is the style of play you are wanting to entertain, you are going to be bringing down the rest of your party. You'll be bringing down the rest of the people at the table by providing or by limiting what they can get out of the game, because the levels to which escapism can be harmful to a story element, it's problematic for the other players because they can't get what they came to the table to get. Because while escapism and irreverent humor are usually appreciated by everybody in small doses, having it as your sole focus as a player and a performer really takes away from what the games might be otherwise. So now we talk to a close cousin to that, and fundamentally tied because of the concept of YOLO and simply escapism. The idea of having a game that's got a relatively high level of gratuitous violence or player abandon. These mechanisms that are capable of being reproduced in a role-play game don't necessarily provide the players at the table with a shared experience, because perhaps they've got a lesser constitution, or they don't prefer to discuss these things in any kind of detail, and perhaps the very idea of tension relief is the opposite of what they're looking for, because they want the concept of a scary, nerve-making, and intense games experience. So when you are looking for a game that's got gratuitous violence and tension relief, look at games where your character creation process is relatively short. A short window for character creation means that it can be replicated on the fly if necessary for players who do get eliminated in the session from their very structure. And other things about the gratuitous violence is that it can be emphasized or de-emphasized as game master desires. So it's a matter of being really clear to your game master what you particularly want out of the session, because there's a level of cooperation that has to be had by all the players for this kind of a game experience to be enjoyable for everybody, because that's not always the case. Now again, all of these kinds of subjects, the depth of the game, the intensity, are all subjects for your session zeros, and we've done a video about that. I'll put the link to the session zero video here. But the element of your thrill or feedback that comes from this gratuity may find itself to be fundamentally, again, a game killer over time, because the players collectively may not find it useful throughout all of your sessions. So make sure that you have a conversation about this. If this is what you as a game master like to do, make sure you get the approval and the understanding of all of your players, because they are the ones who have to endure this week over week, and it may be more than they want to take. I've seen entire groups cease playing simply because either the game master desires to tell this kind of a story, or one of the players tends to be a one-trick pony and drive every encounter to these deeper, more intense play experiences. Of course, there are those, myself included, especially when I was younger, who really appreciates the concept of the story as being light and perhaps having some deep plot structure to them, but generally to be tools for the release of the everyday and the appreciation of the very moments of happily ever after. That there are sessions that you spending more time dealing with the what you're going to spend your treasure on, and what your particular home will look like, and all of these kind of elements that are more attuned with the end of the story and what happens in the happily ever afters than others. And again, it's an acquired taste. Not everyone likes to pursue this portion of the story, but have that conversation with your players and consider running these kinds of events just every once in a while to allow your players to feel a different set of experiences and a different set of emotions than they might otherwise. I have found that the fairy tales are particularly useful when you're playing with younger players, when you have a room full of tweens, maybe early teenagers. They're going to want to think about the good life, think about what things will be like when the troubles and trials of life are over. And it does work really well with some of the escapist personality quirks, but it's actually more about the general nature and the niceness of the conflicts. Perhaps you have villains, but the villains are the kind that would rather slap you with a glove and challenge you to a duel at dawn than to actually, perform some dark skullduggery in the middle of the night. And so you're able to therefore look at the world through perhaps rose-colored glasses, at least for a time, and enjoy the experience for what it is, rather than trying to deepen the reality, so to speak, in the game session. And again, session zeros are the greatest way to avoid these kind of conflicts. Now, this is where we get to where most game masters want to go. Most game masters, especially if they've spent any time in the concept of world building, they want to develop a very, very meaty, very deep relationship with the world that they've created, and they're anticipating that the players will want this as well. And players, on the other hand, often want to play in this environment where, as they've advanced and they've become more powerful within the realm of the story, that they themselves can alter and change the future and the present of the roleplay game in which they find themselves, because they now have for themselves a persona's purpose. And games like Nyko's RPG are built specifically for this, because you can customize where you're going in terms of the ambiance, the flavor, the chronology, even the time period you're playing through, so that your players can experience perhaps nuances of roleplay that they haven't before, because now they're looking at technology changes, maybe species limitations. There's all kinds of different bracketed ways in which you could roleplay that give you ability to drive forward these world-altering opportunities for the players. And again, I'm going to keep being the old saw. I should write an entire book on just session zero. If you want more information on how to utilize that, leave comments down below, and I'll do what I can to provide you with information about that. As a game master with 50 years of experience, I've pretty much dealt with all of the different tiers. And the reality is that your games, especially your games group, are going to be wanting to play a lot of these different themes over time. And so just be aware of all the possibilities that you could provide, and therefore give the players a deeper, richer experience of the world in which they inhabit. One of the more popular game elements is the concept of cosmic horror, as typified in H.P. Lovecraft maybe Clive Cussler, maybe a little bit of Stephen King. The idea of an incomprehensible and abiding dread to the story that perhaps the characters aren't going to make it through, and maybe they do have to worry about whether they make it through literally body and soul, or if something has affected or interfered with that process. And so this concept, while is a fun one to explore, is kind of a downer in many ways, because it provides the players with the agency only to the point where it reaches the indomitable nature of whatever this darkness is. And when you're going to be playing with this kind of environment, you again want to have a clear and understanding relationship with your players, because they might not find such a realm really to their liking on an ongoing basis. Again, playing one or two or even a series of adventures in these kind of dangerous themes is fine, but it's also can be problematic if players are coming in at a very serious, dark theme with kind of throwaway mentalities and you only live once mentalities. So tailor these encounters, and again, the mechanism that you utilize for the game doesn't really influence anything other than the nuance and the flavor. And so it's really it's on the game master to be the one who actually drives this element as well as any other. In reality, a role-playing campaign is generally a mixture of some of column A and some of column B, so to speak, or it could be literally all of them rolled into one. The elements of role-play are that the storyteller builds the environment, and then the players engage in that environment. I can, as an example, at one point I wrote an entire adventure around a village that was found high in the mountains. I intended for it to be along the lines of an alpine village, like something in the Pyrenees or whatever. But I named the location Nestal, Nestal. And that was the only thing that I did that was different, is that I gave the town the name Nestal, and of course referring to it being nestled in the mountains cleft, so to speak, above a glassy, shiny, beautiful lake. And of course my players took that name Nestle, and in their minds they switched gears on me and said, okay, we're going to make this entire adventure campy, and we're going to be going through the town of what they called Nestle, looking for the dreaded troglodytes. They wanted a monster created out of milk and dark chocolate, that it would be not only something they could destroy, but then they could consume. And it was very silly. And the problem is that where I had intended to go had been a rather gothic horror concept, and these people were supposed to be the servants of some great dark master who was actually trying to do bad things to the players. And of course they were having none of it. And of course hilarity ensued, because of course I had to figure out a way to put the troglodytes and other similarly sweet and nasty monsters in there to make it fun for them. And it completely changed the direction of the story. And so for 2 or 3 weeks we were stuck with the cleansing of the Nestle Valley, as they had to clean up their work, of course, and scrub up all the remaining troglodytes that are left in the area. So that's just the nature of the beast. But the idea is that your campaign, if it's a long-term one, such as I run the 5, 6, 7 year long campaigns, then the players are going to be from week to week choosing whether or not they want to play in a certain type of environment. So it's great to have feedback both before, during, and after your sessions to make sure you're providing them what they're looking for, while also getting them to at least nibble around the corners of the story as you intended it to be at least perceived. And this therefore makes each session unique, but makes the campaign absolutely memorable. So the original concept was these are, but you can actually reach out for different properties to assist you to make that story make sense to them. So check out information about Nikos RPG at nikosrpg.com and at the link down below for our Shopify, because there is a current bundled deal for all of the properties that are currently available. We will be doing a Kickstarter on this a bit later in the year, so if you want more information on that and to perhaps get an invite to an early release of that information, make sure you click below, add some comment, and I will add you to the list. In the meantime, thank you very much for being here. We will see you in the next episode. Remember, no matter what you've been doing for the entirety of today, you've done enough work. Now go play.